The sitting Royal Commissioner agreed to give the keynote address at a Liberal Party fundraiser.
He is a man of honour. The government does not have a policy on a plebiscite or a referendum.
Things didn't improve with the news that Tony Abbott's hand-picked Royal Commissioner had accepted and then rejected an offer to speak at a Liberal Party dinner.
The sitting Royal Commissioner agreed to give the keynote address at a Liberal Party fundraiser.
He is a man of honour. He's doing a good and necessary job.
He now is not fit to continue as the Royal Commissioner.
So to try and make sense of what's going on inside the government and how these political missteps are impacting on the future leadership of Prime Minister Tony Abbott, I was joined a short time ago by Laura Tingle, political editor for the Australian Financial Review, and David Crowe, political correspondent for the Australian. David, Laura, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Emma.
Good day.
Dyson Heydon's decision to address the Liberal Party event, David Crowe, does it undermine the credibility of the Royal Commission into trade unions?
Yes, I think it does. I think there's an appearance of a conflict there in the fact that he agreed to speak at an event under the auspices of the Liberal Party where payment by attendees went to the Liberal Party's coffers. I think that's quite a big problem. It's not clear how much he knew about the event before he agreed to attend and what he knew at the point when he decided that he would not proceed with that appearance. So there are some questions about how it's all happened, but the fact is it's a Liberal Party fundraiser. He's an independent judicial individual running a commission that's hotly contested, very hotly contested in the community between political parties, and I think that's quite a problem for that Royal Commission.
Laura Tingle, what do you think?
Essentially now, Labor and the trade union movement, who've obviously been taking a lot of water on this issue and from the Royal Commission, and particularly Bill Shorten, can now basically dismiss it and just say, well, we know what this is all about now. It's basically endorsed the idea that this is a political witch hunt. So whether the Commission continues or not, whether Justice Heydon continues or not, it doesn't matter. The thing has been really badly and I think irreparably tarnished.
David Crowe, what do you think this means for the future of the Royal Commission?
Well, I think it's in a state of sort of suspension in a way. From what I hear during the day, the hearings at the Royal Commission are not actually addressing this big issue. It's a cloud over the entire exercise, but it's not being discussed in the hearings. At the moment, the CFMEU is being investigated in these hearings day by day. Now, at some point, it seems to me, somebody will apply in those hearings to have the Commissioner removed, or they will challenge the Commissioner in those hearings. I don't see, with all the political heat in this, I just don't see how that can't happen. And at that point, somebody's going to have to think about how the Commission proceeds when its top officer is under such a cloud.
Okay, the question of whether the law should allow same-sex marriage, Tony Abbott says it's a question best left to the Australian people to decide in a plebiscite or a referendum. Tactically, what's the Prime Minister up to here, Laura Tingle?
Well, I think he's kicking it right down the can and hopefully kicking the can down the road, should I say. Sorry, it's been a long week, and hopefully off the cliff. I think the problem for the Prime Minister is that that's really transparently what he's trying to do. This is a position completely at odds with what he had to say after the Irish referendum. He said that it was a matter for the Parliament. The law doesn't back him, according to his own Attorney General. So I think, without a doubt, he's hoping that he can get it beyond the next election campaign, one, so that it doesn't become an election issue, and then two, in the very sort of strict confines of a referendum, see the idea go down once and for all.
But it does become an election issue, Laura, doesn't it?
Of course it does. I mean, this is why this is so ludicrous. If you think about what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, Emma, Labor, who, of course, we're not talking about at the moment, which, of course, is supposed to be the centrepiece of Tony Abbott's political strategy, Labor is starting to present itself as the party of the future and Tony Abbott as the dinosaur of the past. And it's like he's going around and deliberately giving them all the material that they need for their campaign, whether it's same-sex marriage, whether it's climate change, but particularly same-sex marriage. I think here is an issue that was difficult for Labor, but the Prime Minister has made it into a really difficult issue for the coalition. And the really ironic thing is most pollsters and most politicians will tell you this is a 20th order issue. People don't care. They've moved on. So it becomes an election issue that characterises the sort of the modernity and in-touchedness of the two sides of politics, but doesn't necessarily do anything positive for the Prime Minister.
David Crowe, as Laura mentioned, back after the referendum that was held in Ireland in May, the Prime Minister said, and I quote plainly, this is a matter that could quite properly come before the Commonwealth Parliament if members of Parliament wanted it to be raised. So what changed?
What changed was a 6-hour debate where towards the end the idea of a referendum came up from Joe Hockey, followed by Scott Morrison, followed by Julie Bishop, and then Tony Abbott picked up on it as a way, as Laura said, to kick the can down the road and to delay a decision. Now, it was a schmozzle of a week in that sense for the government because they chose not to proceed with a simpler way that would have been in keeping with their own Liberal Party principles, which was a conscience vote on same-sex marriage. Now, the oddest thing about the referendum push is that there might have been maybe 10 MPs out of upwards of 100 in the party room, not all of them in that meeting, but maybe 10 or so who actually suggested a plebiscite or a people's vote or a referendum. Suddenly now, that is the real possibility for the government taking that policy to the next election. It wasn't exactly a captain's call because ministers had raised it before Tony Abbott effectively endorsed it as an idea, but it's quite a risky strategy.
So, Laura, first you've got Scott Morrison suggesting a referendum, and then straight out of the blocks, George Brandis comes in to, I guess, publicly lecture him on the particularities of the law on this issue, and the internal party divisions on this can't be good for the government. In fact, you wrote today that the Prime Minister is at war with his own party.
Well, yes, he is. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, in February, people were saying that the problem was Peter Credlin. It's all about Peter Credlin and the Prime Minister's office. Well, all of that's gone now. It's all about Tony Abbott. And the sort of outrage about the way he conducted that Liberal Party meeting before the joint party meeting on same-sex marriage has really blown apart the sort of the cabal of people who've been closest to him. Both George Brandis and Christopher Pyne, of course, have always been moderates of the Liberal Party, but basically got into the Tony Abbott club when he became leader and have been staunchly there ever since. But we've now got this position where this is not just the last straw for them, but I think a sign that they don't see the Prime Minister's future as being all that rosy. They're hedging their bets and they're going out there, as is Malcolm Turnbull, and just making their own positions known on this. And in some ways, once again, the Prime Minister's tactics have given them the clearance to do that.
And David Crowe, as Malcolm Turnbull said this week, do we really want to go to a people's vote in more than 12 months' time and have the issue drag on through all that period when, quite rightly, the people of Australia will be saying, shouldn't we be talking about the economy and jobs, and frankly, shouldn't we have a vote on perhaps climate change or something else? Why limit it to same-sex marriage?
I think that's a real argument within the coalition about how they ended up in this situation where they're going to be fighting over same-sex marriage all the way to the next election when they could have ruled a line under the issue this week, maybe in the next few weeks. It could have been done with a conscience vote.
Laura, you've told us today in the Financial Review that a meeting of the National Security Committee of the Cabinet has asked for a list of national security-related things that could be announced weekly between now and the election. What's that all about?
Emma, I preface this by saying when the Prime Minister was asked about this, he gave a very short answer, which was no, which wasn't incredibly persuasive. And I've subsequently gone back to sources about this. what's happening is, and the point I was making in this piece was that national security, a bit like the Constitution's become a bit of a tactical plaything for the government. There's a list of legislation being drawn up and discussed in National Security Committee, according to my sources, and the whole idea was looking at how the various bits of legislation and what was coming forward could be linked into announceables between now and the next election on a regular basis. So I think the broader point is that we're now seeing all of these really important issues just completely being subsumed into the day-to-day tactical needs of the government.
David Crowe, Laura in that same piece wrote that this is a Prime Minister so desperate, so out of control that he's overseeing the complete surrender of proper governance to day-to-day tactics. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think that there's still a way in which this government can recover. It seems like after a week like this, it seems hopeless, right? They've created unnecessary division on their own side, right at the time when Tony Abbott is trying to divide Labor, trying to find points of difference with Labor and put the pressure on Bill Shorten, and being completely unable to achieve that objective. But I would urge some caution on making a judgment, because there's a year to go. We've seen scrappy governments before. We've seen the first term of the Howard government being a complete mess, and basically it comes down to a binary choice at the next election. And Howard made it work after that very first scrappy term. You never know.
Sorry, David, I've got to violently disagree there. I mean, the point here is not about who's going to win the next election. The point here is that what I was writing about today reflects the view within the coalition itself. Now, we've often had scrappy governments, and obviously the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd governments were pretty ordinary most of the time, but there was some internal coherence or discipline, which in some ways you could say was bad because none of them would take Kevin Rudd on from the cabinet. But this is something entirely different. What I'm writing about is the breakdown of the way a government works. We're not talking about the economy. We're not talking about jobs. They've got no plan for those things, and the relationships within the government and the processes have got so bad that I really don't know, and I think people within the coalition themselves don't know how they're going to actually solve this. I don't know that it's not just a question of changing leaders or anything else. They just don't know what they're going to do about it.
Yeah. There's no question. There's a lot of anxiety and despair in that party room at the moment, no doubt.
And unfortunately, we're out of time. Laura Tingle, David Crowe, thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Emma.